Hello and welcome to this lecture on power and the heroic ideal. Before we get started, take a second. I know no one likes a video to start this way, but take a second and in your head or on a sheet of paper, name 5 of your heroes, historical or fiction. Then list 5 traits represented within the group. So either take the time now or over the next week as we work on this unit, consider this idea. In what ways are these traits you've just listed indicative of cultural codes or personal ideals we have internalized? And how are these heroic ideals tied to access to power in our culture? I figured it was only fair that I stop and ask y'all those questions, because as I put together this lecture, I was definitely reflecting on how the images that I've chosen and the points of view that I'm going to be sharing are definitely informed by my own education, by my own background. Things that I've seen, for instance, in real life were ones that definitely popped up in my mind as things that I wanted to talk about in this lecture. And because I was raised as a classicist, I have a lot of background in European art. I went to the University of Nice in France for a year, so I have a lot of fascination with French culture, for instance. And this piece that I've chosen to start with is Hellenistic, which has a certain kind of like dramatic realism, which I'm drawn to. And I think that's partly because of the things that I've studied and the culture that I've grown up with that just might not resonate with other folks. So this is Laocoon and his sons. It's either the Greek original or a Roman copy. And I saw this in Vatican City when I visited. And I went, oh, that's what the Trojan Wars are all about. And if it's not mentioned in Homer's epics, but it just, for me, expresses so much of the torture of that particular heroic series that I studied as an undergraduate. The hero's journey is definitely part of the cosmos of my idea of what it means to be a hero. And the hero's journey was described by Joseph Campbell, but it's been a part of storytelling for a long time, and is particularly easy to see in the epics that I've given images of on the left. Some of you have already talked about these in your thematic portfolios when you're talking about contemporary artifacts. But the hero's journey is essentially the pattern that we see in Western culture of the call to adventure. Often the hero gains a helper, then they cross over into the threshold of adventure. And I'm sorry this is such an ugly image, but I wanted to take something directly from the Joseph Campbell Foundation, and their text is terrible. So after what we have Night Sea Journey or Dragon Battle or Dismemberment, and similar tests and helpers are accumulated by our hero as they learn things about themselves and the way the world works. There is a moment of like the peak climax, right, which could be a sacred marriage, father atonement, the elixir theft, which I love, or apotheosis, which is a really important word for us, and I wanted to pause on it for a second. So apotheosis, the definition is the perfect form or example of something, the highest or best part of something, or elevation to divine status. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the hero. And it can be a journey, as we see in this graph, but it's definitely an important story for our culture, including what's referred to by Joseph Campbell as the flight, right, which is the return back to the normal world with the elixir or the cure to save the folks who have been left behind on the other side of the threshold of adventure. So if you didn't know about the hero's journey, I'm sorry, because now you're going to see it everywhere. But it's important for us to mention. We have a lot of great sources in our texts that we're discussing. For instance, we have the Narmar Palette in that we're looking at this week in the readings, but I just had to bring in the Great Sphinx of Giza and ended up in a bit of a deep dive. I want to share a fun fact that actually nobody knows its original name. Like Sphinx is the human-headed lion in ancient Greek mythology, which was a term that came into use like 2,000 years after the statue was built. Which I love finding out those things and thinking about how we come up with these the syncretism, right, of various belief systems one upon another. But I read this really interesting article that you can find by Haddingham. It's in the reference list. Really, really interesting, and I loved this particular moment. So, if you stand in the eastern niche during sunset at the March or September equinoxes, you see a dramatic astronomical event. The sun appears to sink into the shoulder of the Sphinx, and beyond that, into the south side of the pyramid of Khafra on the horizon. At the very same moment, and this is Mark Lenher, he's an American archaeologist who's like the it guy in Egyptian archaeology in a lot of ways. He says the shadow of the Sphinx and the shadow of the pyramid, both symbols of the king, become merged silhouettes. The Sphinx itself, it seems, symbolized the pharaoh presenting offerings to the sun god in the court of the temple. Hawass concurs, saying the Sphinx represents Khafra as Horus, the Egyptians' revered royal falcon god, who is giving offerings with his two paws to his father Khufu, incarnated as the sun god Ra, who rises and sets in that temple. In our textbook, we're also looking at Augustus of Prima Porta and images from the Acropolis in Athens, but I had to talk about the Nike of Samothrace, probably because when I first went to the Louvre, the statue is situated at the top of the stairs, and it is really, really stunning. And even in the giant grand staircase at the Louvre, which is ginormous, she's epic. She is iconic, and the closer you get, the more magnificent she is. So I had to include her, and she's a great representation both of political power, of military power, and also a fusion with protection of the gods. As the Nike of Samothrace, which also you'll hear experts call her Nike, who's the winged victory, was originally located in a sanctuary on a small island in the North Aegean, and was intrinsically part of a Hellenistic world defined by the transmission of ideas, goods, people, and artistic motifs over large distances. Today, it is admired by an international audience in the Louvre, and its original intention is similar. The sanctuary of the great gods, promising protection at sea to its initiates, was visited by worshippers from across the Mediterranean. And this was a super top secret cult too. So check out more if you want to read Herring's article, listed again in the references. The statue commemorated a naval triumph, and its placement in this location afforded it a broad audience, advertising its dedicators' military prowess to the world. The Nike's windswept drapery, outstretched wings, and dramatic location assured that it would have drawn the eyes of everyone who saw it. I think we can't have a lecture about power and the heroic ideal without talking about how completely stupendous it is that the Sunstone is aligning this particular Aztec ruler with the power of the cosmos and time itself. Amazing. Couple highlights. Most people identify the figure in the middle as the sun god, Tenochtitlan, but also there are images around it which can tell you which Aztec leader this is associated with. What the disc itself records is the origin of the cosmos as the Aztecs saw it. So it's laying out the ages of people, predicting the ending of the current age. It's a very fascinating piece. And the fire serpents at the bottom, who are holding up the whole inner disc, are associated with time, with the solar calendar, and in some sources as carrying the sun across the sky. In our text this week, we are looking at Napoleon on his imperial throne, but I had to talk about this piece, which is Napoleon crossing the Alps. And again, I saw this at Versailles several years ago, and I have since then I've just really wanted to learn more about Napoleon because I think when I visited when I visited Versailles, the first part of it, you're looking at how, this is how terrible the indulgence was of the monarchy at that point, and you can see why they had to have the Great Rebellion, and then who leads after that? Well, Napoleon, who finished building even more extensively onto Versailles, and um, and then claimed himself to be emperor. I mean, what a fascinating story about the human tendency towards power and the magnificent. So Napoleon is a fabulous example of propaganda, and this piece is. There's so many great things to read about this piece, but one thing I love about it is that um, Napoleon was not at the front of his troops as they were crossing. He was 2 days behind, and he was on a mule. And this isn't even probably an image of him. It was probably, I think it was his son who maybe sat for it. Um, so famously, Napoleon offered the artist little support in executing the painting. Refusing to sit for it, he argued that nobody knows if the portraits of the great men resemble them. It is enough that their genius lives there. This whole piece, I highly recommend that you look at the Pollock piece that I have at the end. The Everything is so incredibly emblematic and symbolic, and a beautiful piece of propaganda for Napoleon's rise to power. The landscape itself, like if you look in the lower left of this painting, you can see Bonaparte's name, and you also see Hannibal, right, and you also see Charlemagne, because the landscape is treated as a setting for the hero, not as a subject in itself. On the rock, right, we have these names, notable figures who also led their troops over the Alps. And maybe they were at the front. I don't know. Another topic I wanted to cover is the commodification, and that's when you take a heroic image and you turn it into a commodity, something that you can buy. So I have a growing fascination with Jeanne d'Arc, and that's because I was lucky enough last summer to go to the castle in France in Chinon, where Joan of Arc went to meet Charles VII in 1429 when she was 17 years old, after she had had her vision about how she could rally the French to help end the Hundred Years' War. Wow, there are lots of typos. I copied this directly from the source, but war is spelled wrong. Anyway, so walking around this castle and thinking about what this young medieval woman went through in her whole epic story of leading the French and then being captured by the English and sold to them, and eventually burned at the stake, later canonized, is just such an amazing heroic story. And then in one of the cases at the castle, it had all of these labels from different products that had used Joan of Arc as their spokesperson over the years, and it's just my mind just can't quite grasp how Joan of Arc would have felt. For instance, like today, you can buy Joan of Arc spicy chili beans. How would she feel about that? Are they spicy enough for her? I don't know. And what makes these beans particularly heroic, I'm not sure. I also found a Packard ad in the lower right from 1927, and the first large word that you see there is leadership. So that drew me down the rabbit hole to finding out about an Argentinian art installation called Barbie the Plastic Religion, which caused such a stir that they actually withdrew the exhibition and didn't hold it. But what a fantastic commentary on the ways in which we package up heroes, and also, how do we then what are we saying to the purchasers, right, of this product? Like, Would a little girl want to grow up to be Joan of Arc? Interesting question. Heroic leader, maybe. Then, if you look inside the box, you can see that the main image is a medieval burning, right? A martyrdom. So I wanted to share that particular fascination that I came across in the last couple of weeks while I was researching for this legend. For this research, for this lecture. And I hope you have a similarly interesting time as you look through our text this week and come up with your next thematic portfolio. Thanks for listening.